I am Aubrey Easton. I was turning 16 that night, and the only gift I got was a suitcase thrown onto the frozen marble steps of our Hamptons estate. I stood on the threshold shivering not just from the December cold, but from the brutal silence. My father, Kent Easton, looked down at me, his eyes colder than the snow gathering on the rhododendrons. "Get out, Aubrey." He bit out, his voice sharp and final. "We are done funding a useless child who can't meet expectations. Go before you dirty the house." Behind him, my stepmother Brenda smirked, adjusting the diamond necklace that was supposed to be my mother's. My older sister Tiffany laughed, a high, careless sound that echoed in the vast foyer. "See how you manage, little sis. Don't freeze." They were celebrating. My failure to secure an early admission to a top-tier university was their win, a clear path for Tiffany to claim my inheritance. I caught a fleeting glimpse of my 8-year-old half-brother Finn peeking through the banister upstairs, his eyes wide and helpless before Brenda slammed the solid oak door shut. I dragged my lonely suitcase through the thick fog rolling off the Atlantic. No money, no phone, just the sheer disbelief that my own family could discard me like trash on my 16th birthday. I collapsed onto a snow-dusted bench outside the neighborhood gates, the cashmere coat my only shield against the paralyzing cold. That's when she appeared, an old woman, barefoot and purple-faced, shuffling toward me. Without a second thought, I took off the thickest thing I owned, my new winter boots, and handed them to her. She looked at me, whispered something about kindness, and vanished into the swirling fog. An hour later, 20 identical red luxury BMWs rolled up in perfect silence, surrounding me completely. The same woman stepped out of the middle car, now wearing a floor-length coat and diamonds flashing at her wrist. She walked straight to me, smiled, and said only one sentence. "Before my story continues, tell me. Before my story continues, let me know what time it is, where you are, and what city you are watching from, so I know how far my story has traveled. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more untold stories." The massive door of the Easton estate closed with a soft, expensive click, confirming I was now an outcast in the only home I had ever known. I stood on the freezing sidewalk, the sound of my blood pounding in my ears louder than the wind. I kept thinking about Finn's eyes, the small, innocent soul who was now trapped inside that gilded cage with Kent and Brenda. I had walked for what felt like hours, the wheels of the suitcase rattling over the perfect pavement of the wealthy neighborhood. Every mansion I passed glowed with warm lights, and the promise of Christmas making my own isolation feel sharper, more absolute. My fingers were already numb, feeling less and less like hands, and more like useless blocks of ice. I hugged my knees to my chest on the park bench, trying to figure out how a 16-year-old with zero resources was supposed to survive the night. I was beyond crying. I was simply existing in survival mode. I heard the slow scrape of bare feet on the concrete path before I saw her. She was an elderly woman, frail, with thin silver hair tangled by the wind. Her face was turning a scary shade of purple, the color of skin that was shutting down from hypothermia. She looked worse than I felt. I looked at my feet. The winter boots Kent had bought me last week were the only barrier between my skin and the biting cold. They were real leather insulated, probably the warmest thing on my body. She stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly, and spoke in a voice rough from the elements. "Miss, do you know if the warming center is open tonight? I walked up from town. Everything's full." I wiped my face quickly, the skin feeling brittle under my glove. "I'm so sorry. I don't have anywhere either." She studied me for a long moment, her pale eyes sharp despite her obvious distress. I noticed her feet were completely bare, already taking on that terrifying, waxy white appearance that signaled deep tissue damage. Something inside me snapped. Here, I was heartbroken and homeless, yet I still had a coat, gloves, and those boots. She had absolutely nothing. I felt ashamed of my own self-pity, which was a luxury I couldn't afford. Without a word, I stood up, unlaced the heavy boots, and slipped them off. The blast of cold air on my socks made me gasp, but I pushed them toward her. "Please, take these. They're new." She looked startled, then looked down at the boots and back at my face. She hesitated, but the cold clearly won the internal battle. She took my freezing hand, squeezing once, and held my gaze for what felt like a lifetime. "Kindness like yours is rarer than diamonds, child." She repeated my name softly, as if tasting something precious. "Thank you, Aubrey." "Noom." She put on the boots, stood up with a new, steadier gait, and walked away into the swirling fog before I could even think to ask her name or where she was going. I sat back down alone, colder than ever, my jaw hurting from the uncontrollable shivering. But the heavy, crushing ache in my chest had lessened, replaced by a strange light feeling. Giving away the last warm thing I had somehow gave me something intangible back. I was huddled on the bench, staring at the empty street and calculating how far I had to walk to reach the nearest town when the silence was shattered. The sound wasn't loud, but it was definite, the low, powerful rumble of expensive engines. 20 identical luxury sedans, finished in a striking, deep metallic red, rolled up in perfect synchronicity, blocking the entire street. They didn't stop in a haphazard line. They formed a silent, disciplined motorcade like something out of a presidential escort. The lead car's rear door opened by itself. Out stepped the same woman. Same frail frame, same silver hair, but now she was enveloped in a magnificent camel hair coat, cinched at the waist, and elegant pumps clicked against the pavement. Diamonds flashed at her wrists and ears, catching the faint light from the street lamp. She looked 70, going on ageless every inch, a person of profound power. She walked straight to me, her eyes holding mine, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. She stopped directly in front of me, looked down at my sock-clad feet, and said the only sentence that mattered. A black and red luxury sedan, opulent in its subtle power, silently glided through the snow-dusted streets, carrying me away to a reality I couldn't grasp. "I've been watching you long enough to know exactly who you really are." That was the sentence. Simple, yet it contained more understanding than Kent had ever shown me in 16 years. I was in complete shock, unable to form a single cohesive thought. The car, one of the 20, was a mobile fortress. The partition rose, separating us from the driver. She offered me a cashmere blanket, which I accepted gratefully, still unable to speak. After 20 minutes of silent driving, we pulled through massive wrought iron gates into an estate hidden behind towering redwoods in Atherton, California. The manor house was not new or gaudy like the Easton home. It was a sprawling classic 1920s Tudor that smelled of cedar and history. A fire crackled in a huge stone hearth in the drawing room. She motioned for me to sit on a deep velvet sofa while a butler silently brought me a cup of warm chamomile tea. "My full name is Harriet Sloane." She began, her voice crisp and steady. "My late husband and I founded Sloane Renewable Energy. When he passed away, I took the company private and used the profits to establish the Compass Foundation. We own assets worth over $4 billion. Aubrey, and the foundation distributes hundreds of millions every year." I simply stared into the steam rising from my cup, unable to process the scale of the wealth or the irony of the situation. This woman, who possessed more money than my entire family had ever pretended to have, had been found barefoot and in need of my only boots. Harriet leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Every Christmas season, I do one thing the same. I leave my security team 2 blocks away, dress as someone who has nothing, no phone, no wallet, and I walk. I walk until I find someone who still has a heart when they believe no one is watching them. Most years," she paused, a hint of sadness crossing her eyes, "I walk all night and go home disappointed. This year, I found you." She explained that after I gave her the boots, her discreet security detail, which had been parked nearby, kept eyes on me for the next 48 hours. They watched me try to find a safe place, watched me panic, and watched me refuse to steal or beg, even when desperation must have been close. You are the first person in decades who gave away the last thing keeping them alive without expecting anything back. I need to know if that kindness, that moral compass, is real. Harriet then walked toward a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking a quiet lake. I have no children of my own, she set her back to me. No direct heirs. When I'm gone, a distant board of strangers will decide where my money goes. I don't want that. I want someone who understands what it feels like to be discarded on a freezing night to decide how we help the next person who gets thrown out. She turned back her eyes, fiercely determined. I am offering you a room here, an education, and a 5-year apprenticeship. You will be trained by the best minds in finance and law, starting with my legal advisor, Attorney Dana Price. If at the end of 5 years you are the person I believe you are, you will take over the foundation. Not as a gift, but as a responsibility to redirect this wealth to where it can truly change lives. I finally found my voice, which was barely a whisper. Why me? I'm only 16. I failed high school admissions. Harriet's expression was unwavering. I was 21 when my own father disinherited me for choosing love over his business empire. I know exactly what it feels like to choose the right path and be left on a freezing bench. I swore that if I ever got the chance, I would make sure no one who chose kindness in that moment stayed lost. Your father, Kent Easton, made his choice. Now you get to make yours. Will you come home with me? I looked down at the hand she extended. It was thin, elegant, and bore the weight of $4 billion, but it felt warm and genuine. I shook it firmly. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was the quiet weight of destiny settling onto my shoulders. The following Monday, I moved into the East Wing, a world that smelled of antique wood and fresh roses, utterly disconnected from the cold chaos of the night I had arrived. My new life began with a rigorous schedule that made the Hamptons private school look like a vacation. Attorney Dana Price, Harriet's imposing silver-haired chief counsel, handed me a leather binder the thickness of a phone book and said simply, "Welcome to boot camp, Aubrey." The early months were brutal. 6 a.m. runs around the lake with Harriet's former military trainer were followed by 7:30 a.m. meetings where I learned to dissect complex tax returns and fiduciary duties faster than most accountants. From 9 to 6, I sat beside Harriet in board meetings at the Foundation's offices on Sand Hill Road, taking meticulous notes, while billionaires argued over impact metrics and resource allocation. Harriet didn't want another rich kid playing philanthropist. She wanted a warrior who could turn dollars into lives changed without wasting a single cent. Her motto became the Foundation's unofficial slogan, "We don't give fish, we don't give fishing lessons. We buy the whole damn river and make sure everyone can eat forever." My academic training was intense. Harriet enrolled me in an executive program for nonprofit leaders at Stanford, full tuition covered. 3 nights a week, I drove the 5 miles to campus, sitting in classrooms with executives, twice my age, learning to measure outcomes instead of intentions. I absorbed knowledge about grant governance, corporate law, and the inner workings of multi-billion-dollar endowments. I was no longer the girl who failed admissions. I was the girl building a foundation that mattered. Every time exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I thought of Finn's small, scared face pressed against the glass. He was my anchor, the innocent I needed to eventually pull out of the toxic environment. 3 years into my apprenticeship, I was given my first major project, restructuring the Foundation's impact investment portfolio. It was complex, requiring input from all departments. That's how I met Nolan Sloan. Nolan was Harriet's grandnephew, roughly my age, and had just returned from an environmental impact fellowship abroad. He was quiet, brilliant, and possessed the same fierce moral compass as Harriet. He arrived one morning for a strategy session on sustainable infrastructure, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. He didn't carry the arrogance I was used to. He carried a quiet, focused determination. He didn't treat me like Harriet's protégé. He treated me like a peer. We spent hours dissecting spreadsheets and mapping out investment risks, but slowly our conversations moved beyond balance sheets. He saw the fire beneath my professional exterior, the pain of the past still lingering. He was the first person in 4 years who made me feel like Aubrey, not just a foundation asset. He didn't try to fix me. He simply stood beside me. Our shared purpose, using vast wealth to solve systemic problems, bonded us. Nolan became my anchor in the storm of work, a quiet, brilliant presence that balanced the stern professional guidance of Dana Price. After 4 years, I wasn't just book smart, I was street smart, business smart, and heart smart. I had found a family in Harriet, a fierce protector in Dana, and a profound, quiet love in Nolan. The girl who was thrown out for being useless was now 20 years old, running a multi-million-dollar portfolio and building a life with a man who truly saw her worth. The deeper I immersed myself in the Foundation's work, the clearer it became that true power was not measured in what you owned, but in what you knew. My transformation was nearly complete, but the last thread of the past was Finn. I knew I couldn't move forward entirely without securing his safety. Nolan was my confidant in this. I shared the entire story with him, the betrayal, the abandonment, and the sickening fear for my little brother. He listened without judgment, only offering support and his immense analytical skills. "We need facts, Aubrey," he advised gently. "Not revenge, but justice and rescue." I used the Foundation's extensive network to pull highly sensitive legal and financial information on the Easton family, circumventing ethical boundaries only slightly. What I uncovered was worse than I imagined. Kent had indeed signed over the bulk of the family trust to Tiffany Easton to secure leverage for his disastrous investment with Bradford Hayes, Tiffany's fiancé. Kent's decision was pure desperation, driven by the belief that Bradford's fraudulent venture, a shell company promising impossible returns on disruptive tech, was his last chance to double his fortune and solidify his social standing. My inability to secure a prestigious university seat had simply been the convenient excuse to discard me. But the most sickening discovery was about Brenda Easton. Dana Price's legal team, while researching the complex web of Kent's offshore dealings, a project I initiated under the guise of analyzing risks of high-net-worth investors, uncovered something else entirely. Brenda wasn't just an indifferent stepmother. She was actively dismantling Kent's life. The documents showed recurring wire transfers, significant amounts to a private account linked to her business partner, a man named Victor Rossi. We had the evidence Brenda had been having a long-standing affair and systematically embezzling funds from Kent's accounts money she siphoned off even before the Bradford disaster. Kent, blinded by his own ego and obsession with social climb, was completely oblivious to his wife's deceit. The emotional wound I carried was no longer just about being unloved. It was about the utter moral bankruptcy of the people I had called family. They were destroying themselves, and, in the process, destroying Finn. I presented the findings to Nolan, feeling a cold, righteous anger. They are sinking Nolan. They are corrupt, self-serving, and they are taking Finn down with them. Nolan squeezed my hand, his grip firm. "We don't need to push them, Aubrey. We just need to stand back and let gravity do its job. But Finn is the priority." We solidified our plan. The Foundation would never be used for personal retribution, as Harriet strictly forbade it. But the information we possessed was legal and public record, waiting to be used at the right moment. I vowed right then, standing in the Foundation's library with Nolan, that I would use every ounce of my new power not for revenge, but to extract Finn from that toxic house. The Foundation's immense resources would be my shield, my weapon, and ultimately, my salvation. The game was about to shift from defense to checkmate. Sometime in late November, 4 years after I left, Dana Price walked into my office with a look of controlled exasperation, clearly knowing who was waiting downstairs. My office on the 25th floor, overlooking the sparkling San Francisco Bay, was a symbol of everything I had built. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal on a clean water initiative, and I was feeling focused and strong. I glanced at the monitor, three familiar faces looking severely out of place in the Foundation's pristine lobby. Show them to conference room B. No coffee, no water. I instructed Dana, my voice steady. Kent, Brenda, and Tiffany walked in looking like poor imitations of their former selves. Tiffany wore a modest suit that clearly wasn't tailored. Her hair was limp, and she kept tugging at the lapel. Brenda had lost her usual veneer of icy control, her eyes darting nervously. Kent. My father looked the worst. His shoulders slumped, his face lined with the stress of a man who realized he had miscalculated everything. Tiffany, the designated spokesperson, started with a rehearsed apology that was hollow and grating. Aubrey, we know we were unforgivable on your birthday. It was stress. Terrible, terrible judgment. But we are family, and we have nowhere else to turn. Kent jumped in, his voice cracked with an obvious lack of authority. Daughter, we need your help. You are the CEO of a major foundation now. You can't just forget who you are. I know exactly who I am, I stated, leaning back in my chair. I used the formal I and you, removing any trace of intimacy. I am the person you deemed useless and threw onto the street. Now tell me what you need quickly. Brenda took a deep, shaky breath. Bradford Hayes. His company was pure vaporware. He cashed out and left us. We lost everything we signed over to Tiffany, the trust, the liquidity, everything. It's gone. $80 million. And you need? I asked, cutting straight to the core. Kent swallowed hard. $5 million. Just $5 million as a bridge loan. We can settle the civil suit filed by the other investors. We can salvage the estate. We need the Compass Foundation to step in. I picked up a file on the desk, a summary of their assets I had instructed Dana to compile. I tapped the glossy cover. $80 million gone in 4 years? You burned it on a Ponzi scheme and questionable Miami real estate based on the word of a man whose only business model was fraud. That's not a market correction. That's financial self-immolation. Tiffany's mask of contrition broke, her eyes flashing with the familiar spite. You're seriously going to sit there in your fancy office and watch us lose the house? This foundation helps people. This foundation exists to help those who never had a safety net, Tiffany. I countered, my voice low and level. It helps children who were thrown out onto the street with nothing. You had an $80 million safety net and you lit it on fire. Your choices brought you here. The Compass Foundation's charter specifically forbids using funds for personal bailouts of solvent individuals who suffered losses due to negligence or malice. I paused for emphasis. And no $5 million is not chump change to a nonprofit. It's what we use to establish 10 new resource centers for youths, just like I was. Kent finally lost his composure. He stood up, trembling. We are your parents. This is blood. Blood is a biological accident, Kent. I replied, meeting his eyes for the first time. Loyalty is a choice you made when you signed the papers to disinherit me, and laughed. My blood family is the little boy you're still keeping in that house. You get nothing, not a dime, not today, not ever. I pressed the intercom. Security to conference room B, please. As the guards escorted them out, Tiffany tried pulling out her phone, shouting about the cold-hearted billionaire sister abandoning her own blood. But outside the foundation's well-guarded doors, the story had already flipped. Due to our careful legal leaks to select financial reporters, the article detailing the Easton family's egregious loss of the trust on the Bradford Hayes scam hit the wire simultaneously. They walked out of my office and straight into a media firestorm, their carefully constructed reputation crumbling in the relentless glare of the Bay Area's financial press. The collapse of the Easton family's public image was swifter and more absolute than their financial ruin. It was, in the American narrative, a total wipeout. The Foundation's internal legal team successfully blocked every attempt by Kent's lawyers to sue me or the Foundation, citing the fiduciary duties of the Compass Foundation and the public records of Kent's financial malfeasance. The media frenzy did the rest. Within weeks, the foreclosure notice appeared on the grand wrought iron gates of the Hamptons mansion. No bidders showed up at the bank auction. The bank took title. Kent, Brenda, and Tiffany were left with only the debt, the shame, and the few designer bags Tiffany hadn't managed to sell. They ended up in a tiny two-bedroom apartment above a storefront in a working-class section of Queens, New York, a pathetic fall from the Hamptons' high society. Their credit was destroyed, their social currency vanished. They showed up at the Compass Foundation offices without an appointment on a bitterly cold January morning. Security immediately alerted me. I told Dana Price to let the three of them into a small, windowless meeting room. I needed this final confrontation to be decisive, absolute, and witnessed. Kent looked defeated, his cheap suit hanging loose on his frame. Brenda had dyed her silvering hair a jarring drugstore blonde and avoided eye contact. Tiffany was clutching a knockoff tote bag like a life raft, her face pale without makeup. Kent spoke first, his voice thin and cracking. "Aubrey, we have nowhere to go. The lease ends in 6 weeks. We're going to be on the street. We're sorry. Truly sorry." Brenda finally looked up, twisting a shredded tissue in her hands. "We made mistakes. We were wrong about you. Please, just enough for us to get back on our feet. For the sake of the family name." "The family name is already destroyed," I said calmly, looking at all three of them. "And you have finally hit rock bottom, not because you failed, but because you chose wrong every step of the way. I believe you are sorry now, sorry for yourselves and the consequences. But sorry doesn't rebuild a life. Responsibility does. Courage does." I slid a slim black folder across the polished table. Inside were 3 documents. "This foundation will not give you a dime," I stated. "However, I know the environment you are currently providing is unstable, toxic, and dangerous for a minor. I know about the loss of your assets, and I know about Brenda's affair and embezzlement, facts that are now known to my legal team and could at any moment become known to the state." Brenda gasped, her eyes wide with terror. Kent whipped his head toward her, his face a mixture of confusion and absolute shock. The revelation, delivered professionally, was a wrecking ball to the last remnants of his denial. "You have 2 options," I continued, ignoring the rising drama. "1. You can continue your dissent, and I will initiate legal proceedings to declare you unfit, using the evidence of your financial irresponsibility, Brenda's moral failings, and the unstable environment. 2. You sign these papers." The documents were clear. Full and legal guardianship and sole financial responsibility for Finn Easton would be transferred to me immediately, allowing me to enroll him in a stable school and provide him with a home at the Sloan estate. In exchange, I would drop all investigation into Brenda's financial discrepancies and provide them with 3 things: Gabriel Reyes, a certified financial planner specializing in post-bankruptcy recovery; a schedule for a free 8-week debt management course funded by the Compass Foundation; and the National Alliance on Mental Illness Crisis hotline number. Kent, broken and betrayed by his wife and his greed, didn't hesitate. He signed. Brenda, knowing her secrets were exposed, signed quickly to save herself from public ruin. Tiffany cried, but signed. I stood up, holding the signed papers that secured Finn's future. This is what the Compass Foundation offers to strangers who lost everything through no fault of their own. It's the same help I offer you. As the security guards escorted them out, Kent didn't look back. Brenda whispered, "I'm so sorry," as the elevator doors closed. I had severed the bloodline. Finn was free. A few months later, on a gorgeous August afternoon, I stood on a stage, feeling neither cold nor unsteady, ready to address a crowd gathered for a profound purpose. The sky over East Palo Alto carried the color of a promise kept. The Compass Center, the Foundation's flagship project that I had personally championed, rose 4 stories high, a stunning structure of glass and sustainably sourced redwood wrapped around a lively central courtyard. This wasn't just a shelter. It was a 200-unit facility offering permanent supportive housing and on-site medical clinic, a job training center and a preschool, a place where no one, regardless of paperwork or background, would ever be turned away. 3,000 people filled the plaza. City council members, major donors, families, who would soon call the building home, and even the governor. Backstage, I stood in a simple, elegant suit, my heart pounding under the weight of the moment. Harriet Sloane, radiant in winter white, gave me the smallest yet proudest nod from the front row, while beside her stood Nolan Sloane, whose hand I squeezed once before stepping toward the podium. The microphone felt heavier than any legal document I had ever signed as I looked out at a sea of faces, faces searching for hope, and faces that had helped build it. Near the back, partially hidden behind a column, stood 3 people I recognized instantly, Kent, Brenda, and Tiffany there, not as guests, but as witnesses to the success they had tried to prevent and, ironically, helped create. I let the silence settle for 3 full seconds before I began, my voice steady and clear across the plaza. 1 year ago, on my 16th birthday, I was thrown out of the only home I had ever known with 1 suitcase and nowhere to go. And that night, I learned what it feels like when the people who are supposed to catch you drop you instead. A ripple moved through the crowd as cameras zoomed in. But I also learned something else on a freezing park bench. I continued. I learned that my worth was not tied to my father's approval, a trust fund, or a university acceptance letter, but to a single choice, the choice to give away the last thing I owned to a complete stranger. I looked toward the back, directly at my former family, though my words were for everyone. Real family isn't DNA. Real family is the stranger who chooses to see you when you are invisible. Real family is the hand that reaches out when you have nothing left to give. Turning back to the front row, I said, "My real family is Harriet Sloane, who chose to invest in character over credentials. My real family is Nolan Sloane, who chose to believe in my mission, and my real family is the small boy who is safe today because I kept a promise." I gestured toward the side of the stage where Finn, now 9, sat happily beside Nolan, clutching a book. Healthy, safe, and genuinely joyful, Finn was my inheritance. We built the Compass Center on that principle, I said. It is our vow that no young person who chooses what is right will ever be left lost. We do not fund selfishness. We fund kindness and potential. The speech ended in thunderous applause, and I walked straight off the stage, deliberately avoiding the back corner because I had nothing left to say to the Eastons. My refusal to forgive them was not bitterness, but self-preservation and a necessary boundary. I had given them tools, not money, and what they did next was entirely their responsibility. That evening, watching the sunset from the terrace with Harriet, Nolan, and Finn, I realized the cold ache I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, steady peace. I had achieved more than revenge. I had achieved closure and purpose. The greatest value of my story is proof that kindness is a renewable, compounding asset. My biological family valued transactional wealth, and it led to their ruin, while Harriet and I built a legacy on relational wealth, trust, empathy, and integrity. And that is what truly sustained us. If you are struggling with a toxic family that values money over your soul, remember this. Your moral compass is your only non-fungible asset guard. Invest in it. And one day it will lead you to a life far richer than anything they could ever buy.